Hey everybody, John Feldt here, and I'm with Craig again, Craig Edwards, and we're the Weatherwise Guys. We've got some really cold weather up here, Craig. Just when you think spring's going to arrive, it's winds blowing from the north. I think we had lows of the 20s, and it feels a lot like winter out there. What's it like there in Fort Myers?
Well, we had a nice weekend. Temperatures delightful in the low to mid 80s, and then we have a front coming through tonight, Monday night, and going to lower the temperatures into the 70s with lows in the lower 50s. So a dry, cool front coming through overnight tonight, and then a little bit of cool spell during the middle of the week, and then probably warming up again by Palm Sunday.
Hey, do you get much spring breakers down there? I read about Fort Lauderdale and Miami Beach. Do you get much spring breakers down there?
Well, Fort Myers Beach is still trying to recover from the Hurricane Ian, so there's not much to do at Fort Myers Beach other than to walk the beach. Not many restaurants came back. So you go up toward Clearwater, and then maybe down south toward Marco, you get some more vacationers. But a lot of the vacationing spring breakers go on from Miami up to Fort Lauderdale, maybe as far north as Daytona Beach. But you really got to go to South Florida to get the full force of the spring break warm weather in the warmer ocean waters.
Hey, I put out a post this past week. I don't know if you noticed it. I talked about how things are worrisome for the hurricane season. The temperatures are warmer. We're in a high era of hurricane activity. And third is, we're going back into a La Nina, which is more conducive for hurricanes. So there's beginning to get a lot of talk about some of the signs, especially the water is just so warm. So, hurricane season's still a ways off, but there is a lot of concern that things are lining up for an active hurricane season.
Yeah, by the time we get to late May, there'll be a lot of hand-wringing going on, I think, about how bad the hurricane season's going to be. So we'll see how that plays out.
Okie doke. Hey, last week you mentioned how you threw those strikes on your opening pitch, and man, I saw this picture here, and that's a pretty good form.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. I should have had a baseball glove on, make it look like I was a legitimate baseball player. So the other photo down there, I was working for the Twins also with public radio. So I was doing a show at the Minnesota State Fair with Kathy Werzer. So that's with the Twins baseball cap in Minnesota Public Radio. And then I fell big from the major leagues throwing out the first pitch to taking tickets at the spring training games for the Twins down here at Hammond Stadium. So that's a picture of me in the bottom right as me as a ticket taker, going from the major leagues to being a ticket taker in the spring training season. So a lot of good memories in the baseball era.
Okay, doke. Well, let's talk about weather a little bit. Last week, early spring, I always talk about it. A lot of times you jump back and forth. It's more like winter. It's more like spring. Nothing really sticks. And last week we had a lot of severe weather. I think I counted like 35 tornadoes. And in this plot, pink are hail reports, lots of hail. I had at my house, I had probably an inch hail, and I was getting a little worried I was going to do some damage. Out west of us in O'Fallon, Missouri, about maybe 15 miles west, they did have lots of sunroofs were broken out, a lot of hail damage out there. So we had a lot of severe weather last week. Tornadoes and hail in particular. And a lot of times early in the season, you get hail compared to late in the season. So this is a time for that. I don't see much down in your area. It looks like it's pretty quiet down there. When you get a tornado, you rank it on the Fujita scale. And I think you talked a little bit about that last week. What's the history of that? There was a Fujita scale, and then there was an enhanced Fujita scale.
Yeah, Dr. Greg Forbes was working along with Dr. Fujita, University of Chicago, and strong, severe, extreme. So they tried to come up with a wind speed and the intensity of the debris field. So they came up with the Fujita scale. I think, John, you looked it up. It was came out in 1971. It was after the Palm Sunday tornadoes that I think Dr. Fujita and Greg Forbes started their research on tornado intensities. Alan Pearson and the Severe Storms Forecast Center in Kansas City partnered with them to create a path scale. So the Fujita scale, I heard talk, John, that the category 5 is winds over like 200 miles an hour. And I think a Doppler on wheels once out of Oklahoma City, University of Oklahoma, they were actually tracking a tornado close enough where they actually got the wind speeds inside a rotating tornado up to about 300 miles an hour. So that's a Category 5, incredible or devastating destruction with a Category 5 Fujita scale tornado.
Yeah, that sort of brings back memories, that name, Alan Pearson. When I started my very first job out of school, I worked in the federal office downtown in Kansas City. I was a hydro intern at the River Forecast Center at the time. But right next door, they called it at that time the National Severe Storms Forecast Center. Wasn't that what it was called? And they were next door, and I can remember going over there to hear their briefings, and occasionally, we would jointly present those briefings. And boy, I was so excited working next to those guys, some of the real legends in severe storm forecasting. I don't remember any of those. Larry Wilson was one of them. Bob Johns. Do you remember any of the other ones back in the day?
I think there was a Galloway. So they were, that was a premier job in the Weather Service, tornado watch and severe storm forecasting. And they did a great job on that event last week, John, that they had the watches out well ahead of time. Most of the warnings were out well ahead of time. Although I did, being an old meteorologist, that we verified a lot of stuff of what we did back in the 80s and 90s when I was doing most of my work with the Weather Service. And we would actually have this thing, what we call a false alarm rate on tornadoes. And so I don't know where they're at with false alarm rates in the National Weather Service anymore, but I clicked on 15 separate tornado warnings last week during the event, and 15 of those were all based on Doppler rotation, strong rotation of the Doppler field. We'll get to that in a minute, but so there you go. Tell them what we're looking at, John, when we look at the Doppler rotation in this storm. This was out of a storm out of Ohio, eastern Ohio, north of Dayton last week at about 9 p.m.
Going back to what you were saying, I sort of remember now, we used to get some statistics, like you said, it was the FAR, F-A-R, false alarm ratio, and the region would you wouldn't want too much of that. And but anyway, this was a severe storm picture you shared with me this past week, and this is pretty classic, isn't it? This is the reflectivity, and there's our tornado hook right here. And I mean, that might actually be maybe some signs even of a debris ball here, some debris lofted in the air. And this is a very strong rotation towards the radar and away from the radar. So these are some of the things that the meteorologists would be looking at in issuing a tornado warning. So that was a pretty strong sign of a tornado with that severe weather last week.
Yeah, not to pick on the Weather Service, but I looked at that, and they had a severe thunderstorm warning out at the time. You can see that little small yellow line that's at the bottom of that storm. That's the bottom of the severe thunderstorm warning area. And you can see the rotation of winds of the red going away from the radar and green coming toward the radar. Very strong rotation. And about 5 minutes after this screen capture on radar scope, they issued a tornado warning for that storm. So I think that one did actually have a tornado with it.
Going back, reminiscing a little bit, back in those days of really meteorology was much more an art than a science. Right now, the algorithms detect so much. And I guess I always say it's like pilots. Pilots used to fly the planes, and now the computer flies the plane. Well, it's the same way in meteorology, but we used to plot weather maps. Remember when we used to plot weather maps? We'll talk about that, maybe a little bit more in another episode. But, the first thing you do in your shift, you get all the data, and you'd spend a good, 45 minutes. And some people could go really fast at plot those weather maps, and other people, it all had to do with if you knew where the locations were. Indianapolis, for example, is IND, St. Louis is STL. But how many were there? There were hundreds of those locations, and you'd have to plot all those.
Yeah, and then thinking back at severe weather, when I first started my career in Milwaukee in 1972, we didn't even have a radar on site. We had radar coming in from Neenah, Wisconsin on paper fax. That's how poor the radar service was back then. It was a 1957 designed radar in 1972. And we had, John, we were talking about that offline, where we could manipulate the radar. We could actually go to cloud tops and raise the antenna up and see the bounded weak echo region, Don Burgess, and people like that. And it created a lot of tornado research before the Doppler was deployed in the mid-1995 era. And so we were doing a lot of hands-on radar operation using the 1974 radar and a 1957 radar.
One of the things I'm looking at a lot right now is, March, in like a lamb, out like a lion. Well, spring's really accelerating. Red is 20 days or more earlier than normal, the leaf index, the initial green up. But look at this extended outlook here. This is 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14. It looks like a pretty big cold weather outbreak and snow. Look at Minneapolis. Your friends up there in Minneapolis that have such a mild winter, they could get quite a bit of snow there. So right now, everything's sort of lining up that, anybody wants this spring to stick. We could be in for some spring variability with cold weather on the way as we round out March and head into April. So doesn't look like that'll make it down to Florida.
No, it looks like we're pretty good down here, but I think I saw that Minneapolis had only 10 inches of snow for the winter season, and I saw a report from Minnesota Public Radio, Sven Sundgaard, in his weather blog today on Public Radio website, indicated that some parts of Minnesota could double their snowfall amounts with a possible situation coming up at the end of this week or early next week with a snow system moving through that would deposit a foot of snow in southern Minnesota. So we'll have to see how that pans out. Maybe we talk about that next week.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, I guess that's all I got to talk about this week, Craig. I hope you have a great week and enjoy the nice weather down there. And think of us up here when it's got this cold weather. I'll be talking with you again next week.
Sounds good, John.
Next week.
See you then.
Take care.